This podcast is made possible by listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's December 13th, 2024. Yes, Friday the 13th. On this day in 1862, as the Civil War raged, construction of Nashville's Fort Negley was completed. It was the most significant in a string of fortifications the Union Army started building pretty much as soon as they took control of the city. It was notable for being the Union's largest inland fort. Sitting on top of what was then known as St. Cloud Hill, it gave commanding views for miles to the south, the direction that any Confederate challenge would come from. But what gives Fort Negley lasting significance is who did the work of building it. Black men and women, not exactly enslaved at that point, but certainly forced into labor against their will. Promised that pay would come, but eventually, not right away. Made to work from sunup to sundown, carving giant limestone boulders out of the hill itself, and then using them to make a star-shaped structure out of that stone, compacted earth, and wood. Many died in the process. And to this day, Fort Negley serves as a powerful example of the complicated and all too often painful relationship Black folks had and still have with this nation. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. I don't think it should come as any surprise that Nashville has long had a complicated relationship with Fort Negley. After the war, folks mostly just wanted to put it behind them. The area became overgrown and all but forgotten. There was a New Deal era effort to shore things up, but that was short-lived, and the vegetation took over again. But in the last couple of decades, the city has put a lot of work into preserving the fort and sharing its history. It's a metro park with a small visitor center and walking paths. Trees have been cut back to make what remains of the structure visible on that hill above the Adventure Science Center. You can stand on the foundations of those parapets, look out to Green Hills and beyond. Imagine what the Union lookouts must have seen a couple of years after the fort was built, when Confederate troops marched in through that area and set up their positions before the Battle of Nashville. One of the most memorable interviews of my career took place in that fort. TSU historian Bobby Lovett, who has since died, agreed to meet me there one morning and tell me the story of the people who built it. It's a chapter in history that he had researched extensively. So, of course, his comments were full of facts and figures and dates and names. But one thing that really sticks with me is the moment when he pointed to one of those boulders and noted how large it was. He said, "I know I couldn't lift it without breaking my back." It was emblematic of how incredibly hard the labor must have been. And down at the base of the hill, where the visitor center and parking lot are, he pointed out how limited the current Metro Park is compared to the impromptu complex that formed there during the Civil War. Sketches from the time show the soldiers assigned to the fort camped on the slope leading up to it. And the people who built Fort Negley also lived adjacent to it. What is now the super hip enclave called Wedgwood, Houston, used to be the site of a contraband camp. That's what people in the 1860s called the tent cities that sprung up near Union encampments, made up of enslaved people who ran from plantations and farms throughout the South to find some degree of freedom and protection from the Northern Army. Nashville had several contraband camps, and after the war, those became the city's first majority Black neighborhoods. Another was on Jefferson Street, which eventually became Black Nashville's main thoroughfare. But the one around Fort Negley, called the Bass Street community, that was also big and important. Urban renewal efforts in the 1950s and 60s pushed many residents out to make room for interstates. Industrial businesses took over other parts. For a while, it was an affordable place for artists to have their studios. Then came a trendy new neighborhood name, gentrification, and with it, the tap rooms, restaurants, and luxury apartment buildings. But another part of that historically important area still belongs to Metro, and now it's slated for an expansion of the Fort Negley Park area. A master plan unveiled this fall calls for incorporating the adjacent plot that was home for years to the Nashville Sounds ballpark, Greer Stadium. That area is to be made into a memorial lawn. Beyond that, the conceptual plan calls for new interpretive displays along the walkways, an expansion to the visitor center museum, and restoring a section of the native grassland with what's being called a reflective meadow trail for contemplating the history and importance of what happened there. For once, it seems like advancing preservation at Fort Negley isn't turning into a fight. Back when they started cutting down the trees, people whose main interest is preserving the tree canopy got pretty angry. And at one point, the city cleared out an elaborate encampment of unhoused people, which of course meant a fight over the best use of the land. So far, I haven't heard any complaints about the new expansion plans. And I guess that makes sense, because this time around, it will have the side effect of giving Wedgwood Houston neighbors a nicer place to take a walk. In just a few minutes, a story from one of our regional partners about one idea for creating transitional housing. That's coming up after the newscast.
You've got a lot of things to keep track of. Work schedules, family activities, the ever-growing list of things you need to remember to do. Updating the credit card or banking information for your sustaining membership may have slipped your mind. With just 2 minutes of your time, you can update your payment information and check one more thing off your list. Peace of mind for you, funding for your public radio station. Go online to WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The approval rating for Tennessee lawmakers has risen. That's according to the latest Vanderbilt poll out today. But the report also found that the State House is not in step with the position of the average Tennessee voter. WPLN's Miriam reports.
More than half of Tennesseans describe themselves as pro-choice, compared to only a third in 2012. That support is even higher for exceptions to the state's total abortion ban, with 82% of respondents in favor of abortions in the case of rape or medical necessity. The poll also found strong bipartisan support for legalizing marijuana and gun reform. An overwhelming majority of voters support a red flag law, which would restrict gun access to people deemed a threat to themselves or others. Governor Bill Lee supported a red flag law after the Covenant school shooting last year, but the Republican supermajority in the state House rejected the proposal. State Republicans also oppose amending the state's abortion ban. But despite that opposition, the approval rating of all Tennessee politicians has gone up since May by nearly 7 percentage points. Mariana Baca-Yao, WPLN News.
A Tennessee man is among the 39 people with nonviolent crimes who are receiving pardons from President Joe Biden. James Edgar Yarbrough of Arlington, Tennessee, is on the list of pardons released by the White House yesterday. It says Yarbrough, 79, is a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran who earned a Purple Heart and other military medals before being honorably discharged. He retired from a shipping company job after 30 years and is highly regarded in the community. Biden is also commuting the sentences of roughly 1,500 people who were released from prison and placed on home confinement during the coronavirus pandemic. The White House says it's the largest single-day act of clemency in modern history. The Tennessee Colleges of Applied Technology have seen their enrollment rise substantially for 2 years in a row. Last year, the number of students at the system of trade schools across Tennessee rose by 19% over the previous year. And this year, that number rose again by 20% compared to the fall of 2023. That increase includes students from all backgrounds, but the group that's growing the fastest is high school students who are dual enrolled in a TCAT trade school. Chattanooga residents face some tough news this week about two of their local landmarks. The Chattanooga Times-Free Press reports the Lookout Mountain Incline Railway was badly damaged by a 10-acre brush fire this past weekend. The specialized cable system, as well as many of the rails and wooden ties, will need to be replaced. The local transit agency says the project will take months and millions of dollars. The agency says it was able to save the rail cars because of an emergency response training it did back in the spring. Firefighters evacuated the area before the blaze reached the railroad, so no one was injured. In another disappointment, the city's Parks Department says it cannot decorate the Walnut Street Bridge with light-up snowflakes this year because of electrical failures. The problem won't be fixed until the bridge gets significant renovations, which will be completed in 2026. December is the time for end-of-year lists. So how did Nashville musicians stack up in 2024? The website albumoftheyear.org has aggregated year-enders from music publications like Pitchfork, Stereo Gum, Rolling Stone, and 50-something others. WNXP music reporter Justin Barney has the analysis.
On the aggregate top albums of 2024, Nashville musicians claim 4 slots in the top 50. Gillian Welch and David Rawlings with their album Woodland coming in at number 49. Johnny Blue Skies, the debut persona from Sturgill Simpson, comes in at number 41. Brittany Howard's effort What Now comes in at number 28. And the Nashville album with the most critical acclaim this year went to Jack White, whose surprise album, No Name, came in at number 25.
You can find out more about our local music scene at WNXP.org. In April, the Tennessee legislature passed a bill to create a statewide music fund, which was a significant gesture. It's now become clearer just how much money it will take for the fund to address the various needs of musicians and concert halls. Both the Nashville Independent Venue Study and the Greater Nashville Music Census looked at how the rising costs of living and doing business are impacting venue operators, musicians, and other nightlife professionals. Stakeholders at the Tennessee chapter of the National Independent Venue Association and the Music Venue Alliance Nashville determined that in its first year, the state's music fund should disperse $16.5 million. The organizations recommend money go toward qualifying venue operators, promoters, and performers. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. There have been interesting developments in Nashville when it comes to finding permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. The city has experimented with converting a motel into transitional units and also opened the first city-run permanent housing, which comes with wraparound services. With that in mind, this next in-depth feature examines how a similar concept has played out in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. It comes from a special project by the public radio station there. Reporter Roberto Rodan spent months gathering stories from the Arthur Street Hotel. It provides mental health and substance use treatment for people on the path to permanent housing. And it asks, can this approach be successful elsewhere?
2 years on from the opening of the Arthur Street Hotel, the staff have helped more than 200 people move from the streets into permanent housing. Countless others have received food, water, and connections to resources. That kind of success comes with challenges and questions about what's next.
There's a lot of talk about scalability. There's a lot of talk about bringing this to other communities. There is talk of our expansion.
That's Donnie Green, one of the founders of the hotel. For him, the answer is obvious.
I mean, if tomorrow somebody walked in and said, hey man, I've got $30 million and I want you to go replicate this in 5 states, I would say yes.
Green says he looks at Louisville, where more than 1,000 people were experiencing homelessness in January during the most recent count, and the country, where housing insecurity is at record highs.
It's not whether we're ready, it's that there is a need that is still unmet here, as well as a million other places in this country.
About 24 guests and staff at Arthur Street gathered recently for their monthly community meeting in what used to be the hotel's breakfast area.
Y'all, we're here. Hi. Thanks for being here.
First on the agenda for Executive Director Susan Bacino is discussing the Halloween party.
Those of you all were here last year really liked the door decorations, so we want to bring that back. And it's a perfect opportunity for us to go a little wild.
After a back and forth about whether costumes should be mandatory, Bacino moves on to a much more serious topic, community safety.
You all may have noticed some differences around campus when it comes to campus safety and who's here.
Bacino tells the group that the plainclothes security guard who had been at Arthur Street for the past few months is being replaced with an internal response team, and a new security company will patrol outside the hotel at night.
So I recognize that this is a big change. There is going to be somebody in a car that's labeled security and driving around with a uniform on.
Days after that community meeting, Bacino tells me the decision to hire security came after staff found people jumping the fence after visitor hours, and some folks from outside the hotel were getting unruly in the parking lot. She says it wasn't an easy decision.
So many people that are here because they haven't had a safe place to be, have had negative encounters with authoritative security.
Bacino says the presence of uniformed officers can be triggering for people who've been arrested or harassed, or who've had their belongings thrown in the trash during a camp clearing. but she says it's important to show that Arthur Street and the services they provide are a benefit to the surrounding community.
That was part of how do we prove the concept with the hotel model so that we're not just fighting NIMBYism from the front end.
NIMBYism means not in my backyard. It's shorthand for the pushback by neighbors or businesses that would be close by. Arthur Street is mostly surrounded by warehouses, but it hasn't always had the best relationship with its direct neighbor, a Circle K. People have tried to steal food or panhandle outside the gas station, though hotel staff have tried to work with them to stop it. NIMBYism has been a big challenge in Denver, where the city government has converted multiple hotels into supportive housing and emergency shelters.
Well, Brian, businesses across the area, they have been greatly affected since the homeless shelter has opened 3 months ago.
This is being shoved down our throats.
Morales says last weekend someone tried to burglarize the business.
Those stories from CBS Colorado and Fox 31 reflect the kind of public opposition that could come with building another Arthur Street, in Louisville or elsewhere. But NIMBYism isn't the only challenge. Arthur Street's housing-first approach, allowing guests to continue using drugs in a safer environment, leaves them in a bit of a legal gray area. Lisa Dissinger is the co-founder of LDG, one of the largest affordable housing developers in the country, headquartered in Louisville. Dissinger, her husband, and a group of other executives purchased the hotel and funded the creation of Arthur Street.
If you really look at it, we're crazy for doing this. I mean, it's like, why are you doing this? Like, why do you set yourself up for this?
Dissinger says in Louisville, city officials aren't blind to what goes on at Arthur Street. She thinks the reason they aren't busting the doors down is because the program works.
The fact that we've put so many people into housing and taken them off of the street, it's kind of hard to argue with it. People are going to do it. It's just a matter of where and a matter if you can get them the support they need so that they can keep getting better.
Dissinger says Arthur Street monitors how often the police department and EMS are coming to the hotel to make sure they're not being a drain on public services, and they've worked to build relationships with city leaders.
And they appreciate what's happening, so we're not getting the pushback. And I think if you can do that in other communities, but you have to take your time.
While Arthur Street has so far been able to operate without law enforcement interference, it's not clear how another city would respond to this type of program. Anyway, what keeps Dissinger up at night isn't police raiding the hotel, it's funding. Currently, the LDG Foundation and its offshoot, the Rita June Foundation, pay for basically all of the hotel's operations. It's about $3 million per year.
I kind of laugh when they come and they go, okay, can we open 10 more of these? And I'm like, we can't even as a community fund this one.
Like Donnie Green, Dissinger sees a need for more of these hotels locally and across the country, but that requires long-term financial sustainability. It costs Arthur Street about $150 per guest per night. That includes all of the wraparound services like case management, access to mental health counselors, transportation to doctor's appointments. Dissinger says they can't fund the hotel forever.
And we're putting a lot of resources in, but we can't do it alone. No one can do it alone. It's not possible.
Arthur Street's leadership has recently started exploring what grants and other funding streams are available, but outside funding can have its own pitfalls. Sometimes nonprofits have to tweak their mission or their work to fit with what they can get a grant for. Plus, part of the hotel's success has been its partnerships with other housing agencies and nonprofits. If Arthur Street starts competing with them for limited pots of money, that could strain relationships.
I really wanted to get to the point of what does it really take when you don't have any of that to deal with. But now we're to the point where we're going to have to deal with it.
The folks at Arthur Street feel like they've developed a service model that really works. They've helped people, many of whom have been on the street for years, get into housing and back into the community. They're eager to expand and to build more Arthur Streets in other places. But first, they'll have to figure out a funding model that works too. I'm Roberto Roldan in Louisville.
You can learn more about the Arthur Street Hotel and see extensive photography by searching for the project Redefining Hospitality by Louisville Public Media. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who have left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. Make your year-end donation right now at WPLN.org. And when you do, leave a comment and say you listen to the podcast. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up next week.